everyone so much for being here. And as you're coming in this afternoon, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat to everyone, just tell us who you are and where you're coming in from, what organization you work for, what brings you here. It'd be wonderful to meet you and be able to reference that. So my name is Rachel Waddell, and I'm very excited to have you joining us for our fourth session in our music education series. I'm joined by my co-founder, Verena Lucia Anders, and we are going to start by asking you something we haven't done for our previous sessions, but since this is our second to last one, I would love if you would just take a second individually to take a screenshot or to take a picture on your phone if you're not comfortable with a screenshot, and just post that to your social media and tell everyone that you're here. You don't have to do it during the session because you don't want to miss this great conversation, but you can feel free to do it afterwards and to share your experience with this so that people know for the future. So I'm going to start by telling you just a bit about Conductors for Change. We're a nonprofit organization that strives to initiate long-term lasting reform in classical music by offering a safe, constructive, and inclusive platform for content, conversations, learning, and personal and artistic growth. And this is our music education series, which in particular explores different perspectives on how we can create equity and inclusion in and through classical music and music education. To learn more about Conductors for Change in our music education series, please visit our website at conductorsforchange.org. That's conductorsforchange.org. Or visit us on Facebook or Instagram at Conductors for Change. I'm pleased to introduce our fantastic set of panelists for our fourth session, which is titled Perspective for Professional Orchestras. And it's a bit of a tale of two coasts this afternoon. We have guests from the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra and the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you who they are, and you'll get a chance to hear them and their own introductions later. So from the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, we have Camille Delaney-McNeil, who's OrchKids Director of Programs, Khandeya Sheppard, who's OrchKids Senior Program Manager, and from the LA Phil, we have Fabian Fuertes, who's the Manager of YOLA, and Phil Bravo, Associate Director of Social Innovation. We sincerely thank them for being with us this afternoon. I want to encourage all of you to please feel free to use the chat box and the function to respond, to ask questions, to engage with one another. The idea is that it is a dialogue. So don't hesitate to, as you're listening, to react and to ask questions and to engage with us. If you do have a question, you can direct that to my colleague Verena. There she is, she's waving, and she has relabeled herself Conductors for Change. And if your question is for the end of the conversation, then we will either cue you to ask your question, or if you're a little bit shy, we're happy to ask it for you. We'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of today's discussion. Also, this is your friendly reminder that today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our social media. So we ask that you please keep your mics muted at all times. Thank you. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and also to tell you more about their organizations. So up first, we have Camille Delaney-McNeil, OrchKids Director of Programs, and Khandeya Sheppard, OrchKids Senior Program Manager from the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for joining today. We're super excited to have this conversation with you. Just going to quickly share, do our little Zoom sharing of screen magic that we all are privy to at this point as we introduce ourselves. Let's see if this is working, and just let me know in the chat or elsewhere if this is not working for you. I'll just quickly go first, and then my colleague Kay will speak. But as Rachel said, I am the Director of Programs for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra OrchKids program. I've been with OrchKids, almost 8 years now, so quite some time. I myself am a classically trained musician. I graduated from Peabody Institute on flute, but I'm also a singer as well. I hail from an opera singer for a mother, so I couldn't be too far from that. And in addition to being an administrator with the program and helping to lead our program initiatives, I also do a lot of teaching as well. So I'll just quickly pass it over to Kay before we talk a little bit more about our program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Khandeya Sheppard, or you will hear me reference to as Kay sometimes here. I have been with OrchKids since 2013, actually. Started with one of their programs where they were bringing in future arts administrators to kind of study the education programs under the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and I ended up transitioning into OrchKids full time. I am a steel drum player, musician, arts administrator, advocate. I studied at the Berklee College of Music, where I received my bachelor's in music business and management, and also had a minor in Africana Studies, Music and Society, studying how music and society kind of intertwine and can be done together. And I also taught in similar programs in the Berklee Preparatory Academy and as a faculty outreach teacher there, which all of those experiences kind of couple and mirror in the OrchKids program where I have been since 2013. One thing that we talk about here, we'll get into what we were able to do, but one of the things that I was able to establish is the brass band, the OrchKids brass band at Booker T. Washington, which was the first site that I was assigned to. And that kind of changed the scope of how OrchKids brought music into kind of neighborhood school that's right down the street from the symphony, but in a different way that wasn't just classically oriented. So I'll pass it back over to Camille.
Yeah, Kay is an amazing fixture in our program. I love working with her every day. So for those that may not know, OrchKids is a Systema-inspired music for social change program. And we offer during and after school programming for students in Baltimore City. That's the end of our beautiful slide there, so I'll stop sharing. In Baltimore City. And, really, when we talk about, and we'll talk about this as throughout the session as well, but when we talk about the importance and seriousness of what music can do to produce social change, we really take that to heart at OrchKids. It's embedded into the fabric of what we're teaching our students, how we're training our teachers, the kind of language that we're using, and how we're ever evolving in our programming and our choices and all of that. So Kay mentioned a few of the things that we have, but this includes ensemble-based learning through not only Orchestras, so something unique about us. Kay mentioned brass band, but we have a real affinity for creating chamber groups in our program, and also mixed instrumentation that is unique and not customary, right? We had a woodwind quintet with added cello in the mix. So we're always constantly finding ways to be responsive, to be inclusive in our music making and our approach, as well as addressing what the needs are of our students beyond the musical context. But, one of the other elements as well that many Systema-inspired programs adhere to is that artistic vision and excellence quality. So that is the bulk of what we do and what we try to provide for our students. But I do want to emphasize that we put as much equal weight into the social aspect of what we do, as well as the musical. And I know we only have a short bit of time, but Kay, if you wanted to add anything else, please feel free.
I think one of the things that you will start to understand as far as OrchKids has been, since its inception, it's been very responsive and reactive to the community around. And I use the word reactive loosely, but I mean, we adapt to what the community around us kind of needs. So Baltimore, when OrchKids started, is a different Baltimore than it is now. In the context of the country, of things that's been going on, there are a lot of different needs and social things that we have to consider when we're going into the communities, in the different communities, even across town in Baltimore, with what we are able to bring there. So we'll get into that later on in the conversation as we go.
Thank you both so much for that and for sharing more information about OrchKids and what you both do. I'm now going to turn it over to our representatives from the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Fabian Fuertes, the manager of YOLA, and Phil Bravo, Associate Director of Social Innovation.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Fabian Fuertes. As Rachel mentioned, I'm a first-gen Latinx, native Angelino. Shout out to our LA Dodgers and Lakers. And most applicable to today, I'm a strong advocate for the arts. I hold the position of manager with YOLA within the LA Phil now for the past couple of years. And prior to that, I've held positions with Oberlin College and Conservatory, Aspen Music Festival and School, and the Philadelphia Orchestra Association, as well as Play on Philly and Tune Up Philly. I've been on the East Coast for several years. Can't wait to go back and visit when we're able to. But prior to that as well, I studied music. I was a music performance major throughout my higher education, and also started the clarinet way back when I was 8 years old. I had the fortunate privilege to do that in the district I was living in within Southern California. Now I'm with the LA Phil, obviously, and I'm very proud to be a part of an organization that designs and delivers world-class learning opportunities to under-resourced communities, especially. In YOLA, I have the privilege of being a part of a network that serves now more than 1,300 students across LA County through 4 main sites, and we're growing. We have a 5th one opening up in Inglewood in 2021. Through YOLA, our students receive free musical instruments, intensive music instruction,
they're not good at making
academic
clear
support,
that other nonprofits are,
and leadership training. And someone else I think wanted to tag in for a moment, but I'll keep going. We've been doing this now since 2007. This was created through the LA Phil with Deborah Borda and Gustavo Dudamel, and Phil and I will take you a little bit through the history of it and what's been going on now. But just to give you a little tail end about myself, my passion for arts education and social justice inspires the work that I do in creating a profound societal renewal in our generation and the next. And today I'm very excited to listen and learn from everyone who is participating today, especially from our colleagues across the country and throughout the world. And I hope today's experience will help me explore personal blind spots and transcend ineffective patterns and enable positive transformation. I will pass it to Phil.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Phil Bravo. I believe my title is Associate Director of Social Innovation for the LA Phil, but essentially that means that I help oversee our YOLA programs, both on the local front, which Fabian dug into, and also on the national side. Personally, I, born and raised band kid, saxophonist, all of the nerdy things. I was the drum major, all of that stuff. And then I just wanted to make a life in it. And I had some great teachers that were mentors along the way that kind of showed a way to be a teacher in a way that was different than just focusing on the scales and the auditions, and really just, from an early age, I had a lot of great models that I still look to of what it means to be a music teacher in a really holistic way. And so I, both of my degrees are in music education. I then spent a good amount of time in the public school classroom at the elementary level, the middle school level, and then mostly at the high school level, and everything that comes with that. The quick story of kind of everyone has a circuitous professional path. I spent every summer doing orchestral operations and music library for orchestras. Even though I'm a saxophone player, I can do an up bow and a down bow, even though I didn't know what it meant when I started doing that. Treated it like an art project, but I became the head librarian of a summer music festival at Brevard Music Center that really introduced me to the orchestral world in a way that I feel really grateful for. And that, started a path where through friends of friends, I started a orchestral operations and production career in New York City. Ended up taking on a role at Carnegie Hall in secondary and elementary school programs that started to merge these worlds. And then I was lucky enough about 4 years ago, this position opened up at the LA Phil that really provided an opportunity to bring all these kind of disparate parts of what I really love about the work, most of all bringing me closer to work directly with young people. And so I made the move out to LA and have been here for just over 4 years. The only thing I'll add really to Fabian's explanation of the program, and I'm sure some of these things will come up, I'll add two things. One, obviously, and most important for this conversation, is it's a really interesting model, both for us and for Baltimore, and our relationship and the way that we work with a major symphony orchestra, while we are the corner of that, we're the corner of that organization that is focused on education, youth, and progress and process, as opposed to presentation and product. It's not to say that we aren't focused on product. It's not to say that the orchestra isn't focused on process, but it's an interesting space to navigate. And I'm sure we'll dive into some of those questions. The other thing that I want to make really transparent, from the outside, YOLA is a program that's been operating for 12 or 13 years. People see YOLA as one kind of monolithic thing. We have a music program. We're a youth orchestra. We're a network, as Fabian mentioned, of partnerships that this program would not exist without. At our first site, it's a partnership with LA City Rec and Parks and Harmony Project, and it really is a network that helps support those students. Heart of Los Angeles, which is a community-based organization near MacArthur Park in LA, that is just a phenomenal partner who does so much, brings so much into the space of college access, all of these, all of this amazing youth development experience and knowledge and colleagues that are not naturally in amongst my colleagues at the orchestra. And then we partner with a school district for our third site, YOLA Camino Nuevo, and YOLA at Torres. We're in an LAUSD site. All of this is to say, it's really a network of organizations, people, parents, stakeholders, whatever language we want to use. And I'm thankful for the resources that the LA Phil brings to the table, both in terms of the people and in terms of the support for instruments and all of these things. But we recognize that we're one part of a huge puzzle that really makes YOLA into the organism that it is. Full stop.
Thank you very much, Phil, and also Fabian. So we're going to jump into the panel discussion part of this panel discussion with our first question, which is, what role does a professional orchestra have in fostering EDI in music education and the classical music field in general? And then with that, how does your organization approach the question of access, equity, and follow-through in music education? So Camille, can I start with you on this question?
Sure, absolutely. So it's interesting, you heard Phil speak about partnerships and how this network is created. And it's certainly very similar for OrchKids as well. I dropped into the chat too, but just to reiterate, we had a really innovative leader in our music director who's in her final year, but in our music director, Marin Alsop. She's always ahead of the trend. And upon coming to Baltimore, working with the symphony and putting her heart into things, really understood that, hey, my orchestra, what we're seeing on this stage is not really reflecting the community. How do we fix that? And so that led us to the genesis, under her direction at the time, but the genesis of OrchKids. And but not only, what we have to be careful about is institutions inserting themselves into communities without really trying to do the work and embed themselves into what's happening in that community, right? Because then you have posturing and then you have imposition, and that's not conducive for actual change, right? And so to me, the role of the orchestra in this work is to be all of those things. I mean, I was just having this conversation the other day about the role of art, not only arts institutions, but artists themselves in the tide of social change. Whenever there's a huge movement, whenever there's a freedom walk, whenever there's, high stakes situations going on, there's always art from that. And it brings us together, it unites people, it rallies them. There's always that expression of art. So how our cultural institutions posture themselves is really significant, because they are going to be the catalysts often for what everybody else will do and accept. Because that kind of, the generic saying of music is the universal language and it brings us together. But, I say the experience of music is that universal piece, right? Everybody's music is different and we have to accept that. But what we feel and what we are drawn to when we experience music is the key. So that it's a large responsibility. And, I must commend our organization, and a lot of organizations have a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of pandering out there right now, if I'm going to be completely honest, about the work around DEI and what it takes to get there. But I am, and I'm sure Kay will speak to this too, but we are, kind of proud of our institution for not only putting words out there, but actually trying to put some bones to this. And that has started with a DEI committee that's a part of the board and a part of the staff. OrchKids has always been doing this work. We've also formulated our own DEI work group to kind of check ourselves. But, as we go into the conversation, we'll talk about the things that we've already been doing for years, because to what Kay said, we've had to be responsive and reactive to what we were doing in our community, and responsible. So our 3 R's there, right? I think orchestras have to be very clear that we hold that kind of opaque responsibility in our arts institutions, that really unclear, unsaid responsibility to be that catalyst and that demonstration for change, because we can have that deep impact, from my opinion.
Go ahead, Phil. You're unmuted. Go for it.
I was actually going to say, Fabian, do you want to take the first stab at this for the LA Phil side?
Sure. Well, let me take it from my own side. This is just my personal opinion. LA Phil adjacent, perhaps. I think EDI work and fostering it in music education and the classical music field is a substantial role, and it's important that professional orchestras should take on. I think it's not only important for the positive change it can have in our society, but let's be honest, it's also going to help build a greater and more sustainable future for professional orchestras. We know some of the stats. As of 2014, top orchestra ensembles in the U.S. included a ridiculously low percentage of people of color. In particular, 1.8% were Black and 2.5% were Latinx. We also know that, when blind auditions started going into effect back in the 70s, it was helpful with the gender gap between men and women. The percentage of women in orchestras hovered under 6% in 1970. And then as of this year, women now make up a third of the Boston Symphony Orchestra and half of the New York Philharmonic. Great, we're making steps in a positive direction, but there's plenty of flaws within that system as well. Blind auditions, for example, the screen seems to go down in a majority of professional orchestras once you get to the final round. And I've observed or heard, not saying at the LA Phil, but plenty of musicians who are automatically advanced into quarter, semi, or even final rounds because of the current post that they hold or have held. And so the current status quo it's just not working. If things are to change, professional orchestras must be able to take proactive steps to address the appalling racial imbalance that remains in the ranks. And most are hanging on to a system that has impeded diversity. It's particularly ridiculous at a moment when the country continues to be galvanized by police brutality against Black Americans. And when orchestras who are largely closed down by the coronavirus pandemic, are also brainstorming on how to be more relevant to their communities and how to redress racial inequalities among their personnel when we reemerge into whatever our new normal may be. And if the musicians on stage are going to better reflect the diversity of the communities they serve, there needs to be a multitude of systemic changes. And these discussions have been happening for a long time. I don't know that I've been able to think of any, particular solution. Lots of people might say, oh, let's go with what they said or what she said or what he said. But for me in particular, again, from my perspective, I think it falls into three main buckets. One is privilege of power, one is privilege of the pipeline, and one is privilege of the system. With regards to privilege of power, who holds those seats, between the board, between senior and executive staff, artistic committees, who do you know? The amount of diversity in these positions of power is strongly lacking. And it's one part of the problem since they hold many of the keys to creating and or continuing the production of culture, content, hiring, and firing of personnel within an organization. And with regards to the pipeline, I mean, this is an incredible part of what we do, right? Whether it be OrchKids, YOLA, many else STEM-inspired organizations, arts education activists, all out there with regards to access to the arts as a student, from early childhood all the way through higher education, equity of arts and equity of arts access to our students. Are we being inclusive? Are our students welcomed, respected, supported, and are they valued to fully participate? But I think one of the things that isn't talked about enough that I'm going to give a shout out to my brother from another mother, Lacolian Washington, who's a champion of talking about this, is the privilege of the system, the content and culture. The reason why you don't have any Black or Latino people in them is not because of they're playing Beethoven, but it's because the content and culture of the place. And so people tend to be solving for the wrong thing from his perspective. It's people tend to be solving for, why don't we have Black and brown people in here? Which actually puts the impetus on Black people as the problem to be solved for. But they're not the problem to be solved for. It's the institutions that are the problem to be solved for. The thing that gets missed in all these metrics that we come up with through our research is the number of people who haven't gotten into the orchestral field and quit. The metric doesn't test for that. It just takes a snapshot. So there have been plenty of people who were in the game and bounced. They were of a quality in which they could have gotten one of those jobs and they were in it for a minute and quit. They were either quit on their own or on some level, they got expelled by the system. And the challenge with diversity initiative is that they don't change the structure of the host institution. And so what you've done is you've now put a person into an oppressive space at times. Your metric is better, and yet the person is being damaged. The person who made your statistic better is being damaged, but we call it success because the number went up. We don't acknowledge the fact that sometimes folks are being damaged by it. And how can we be, I think of my partner who's a doctor, how can we be like a doctor and do no harm? If we're trying to see quality musicians and trying to have some of the world's greatest, we're missing a lot of musicians because of the culture within that either chases them out, where the people just give up, or it expels them. And I think that more people need to be talking about that realness that Lacolian brings up on this subject because it's the truth.
Can I piggyback on that really quickly? I was shaking my head over here because I was really like writing my notes on the side. And what I wanted to bring to that is completely right. What I've been kind of professing all along is that it's an ideological shift that needs to happen. And for a lot of people, that sounds like, okay, we're going to solve, like you said, solve the institution or solve, we're going to target these certain things, but it really is a personal thing that it's coming into play, whether it be what's happening with the musicians and what things that they have been taught to value and have placed no value on. For instance, I've written down, the art. We're talking about access to art for students and different things, and what the idea is that for some people is that you're going into the community, you're bringing it to them for the first time, but you have to remember that these communities have their own way of expressing music, and so you are not the first thing. You are bringing a different aspect of it, but you are not the first thing that they may have seen. One thing that OrchKids is doing when they accessed, they looked at Baltimore City and accessed the files on kind of like where music was happening and where music was not happening in the city at the time, is they were bringing, instruments into a space that either had lost instruments or didn't have access to it because of various reasons that were going on in the city at that time. And so it wasn't a case where, it was, we're just coming in and these students have never experienced this. It's like, okay, there's a complete lack. It's not fair. It's not fairly balanced across the city. And we're trying to come in and service that for the city, for those students, for that community. That's one thing. The second thing, to piggyback on what you talked about culturally, me, I will tell you all that's on the call, I am from Trinidad and Tobago. That's where I was born. And so one thing that you have to realize that with America, the landscape of America, culturally, there's so many different people here from all walks of life. I will let you know that a lot of people from, different cultures outside of the US, outside of Europe, because of colonialism, have already been exposed to classical music. So this idea that, nobody wants to participate in different things like that is also something that kind of needs to be shifted away from, because, you have the idea that comes up that, we don't want to, we don't value, we being, people of color, different ideas out there, because we haven't been exposed to it. But in my culture with my instrument, steel pan, we've been playing classical music as long as there was, my country got independence in 1952. As long as England and France and Spain and everybody was there, we were playing all the music from those cultures as well. So it's access to the instruments, yes, and showing everybody what to do. But one of the things that we have to kind of sit and think about is the ideological thing that is there. What is the symphony, orchestra, whoever these musicians are, what are they trying to accomplish? Are you trying to conserve a certain part of cultural things, or are you trying to conserve the art form? Are you passing on the art form to the youth, or is it that you're passing on this part of the art form to the youth? Are you teaching them how to play a trumpet, or are you teaching them to play a trumpet as a classical musician? Because, in certain ways, a student might want to play a trumpet, and like behind me in these pictures, they might end up deciding that they want to study Dizzy Gillespie. And is that okay? And you have to kind of break down where you are to make sure that you give them access to the different avenues. One thing you brought up, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the pathway. One thing that I'm really, really proponent for is kind of looking at the pathway and assessing it, not from the way that we've been trying to do it, but really, does it actually exist? So we have the pathways that are there. We're creating certain things in our organizations in terms of what we're doing with the youth and different things, and they get to a certain level and they cannot enter. There's a barrier, and it's identifying those barriers and figuring out what the system has in place that either, needs to be taken down so that they can kind of move through that, because you're seeing it on the level of orchestral or auditions and different things like that needs to be removed. But even before then, okay, well, how do we get to, the preparatory? How do we get to those? It's the pipeline stems from like way before that. And is that a thing that still needs to exist? Because if you don't go through this pipeline of we have had these certain teachers, then you can't even get to the colleges where the other teachers are recommending people to go to orchestral auditions. And it's a whole thing that needs to be broken down. So we're attacking it from our end, in preparing the students. But once they're prepared, the system is still out there, And so I completely agree with what you're saying. And I want people to, everybody thinks about systemic, and I want you to equate that, if you can now, and this is for me personally, as ideological. Every time you hear the word systemic, think ideological. Can there be an ideological shift at your organization to allow this to happen? And that means, talking to different people. We have a lot going on right now about whether institutions should be training people on certain, on racial things or different things. But we have to have these conversations as adults because it's affecting everything that comes after that. And that's why I'm going to leave that.
And just to chime in, first, I just want to recognize some kind of similar language that we're using in different ways it's really important language. The two ideas of access and pipeline, and we're also using the language pathway. And when we're buried in the work every day, we know why and how we're using that language in different spaces and with different students, and we're using it in a way that is not, we use all of that language. But from the point of view of an orchestra, and I want to, again, I think I overused the term monolithic, but, an orchestra, a professional orchestra is far from a monolithic thing, right? The LA Phil and the Baltimore Symphony have a very different reality than many orchestras across the country. And between the two of us, our organizations have different structures. We have different, everything is completely variable. And when we're talking about, I had the benefit of, in my previous role, working with orchestras and the education departments across the country. So when we're talking about Rogue Valley versus, Charleston or Kenai Peninsula, where you have either a semi-professional orchestra, fully professional orchestra, regional, some places in Louisiana, if they start an education program, their teachers, that's additional income for them. At the LA Phil, it's actually when we get to have our musicians involved heavily with students, we recognize how special that is. And they want to, but they've got a full-time position. So the kind of considerations on a very practical level are just very different based on the structure of your orchestra and the realities for your musicians. But from a fundamental level, regardless of size, scope, budget, any of those things, when we ask the question, how does the role of a professional, or what does the role of a professional orchestra have in fostering EDI and music education? Part of that role is recognizing that what we mean when we say access and we say pipeline is that we are not changing. We have a product, we have a thing that we believe in. This is what our orchestra does. We are providing access. We're opening the doors, but access work is just getting people in the door. You're not asking questions of yourself. What about our practice? There are so many questions to ask about, again, practical level questions. What are we programming? Who's on stage? Who is in the box office helping get people, all of these things. And then the idea of pipeline, and Khandeya is saying pathway, right? And actually it's an important distinction. Pathway means a student has a choice, and we're not defining success. We're not saying where that ends. Pipeline is we're going to shove you in this one thing that goes to one place. And hopefully if we get enough people in there, it builds up enough pressure that we can get you moving fast. But it's one place. And if you get stuck along the way, you're just stuck in the pipeline. You're a problem. And so, the only thing I want to say about that is so important at all levels is then an idea of when you're asking these questions, just to skip ahead, because I know we've been talking for a bit, is mission alignment. Why are you engaging in this work? The LA Phil and Baltimore Symphony chose to create programs that are working directly with students and create music education programs that were focused on young people that maybe in different communities and for different size and scope of orchestras, maybe you want to focus on adults. Maybe you want to focus on different parts of your community within the scope of what you can do. What is within your sphere of influence, and what do you have real resources to deal with, whether it's your board being bought in, whether it's your staff having existing capacity, all of these questions of why would you focus on one program over another? Everyone shouldn't start OrchKids. Everyone shouldn't start YOLA. But at the same time, everyone needs to ask the same questions of how do we decide what our mission is with regards to our community and EDI work, and instead of saying access, saying equity, right? How do we engage in a conversation meaningfully with our community that affects us in the same way that it affects in the same way that we're trying to offer something, right? How is that an exchange? And when we talk about equity, mission alignment, how does it go from literally from board level to, and I don't want to go down, I should go sideways, board level, the organization and staff, when we're dealing with education, teachers, parents, students also should not be looked at as a thing to be fixed. They are partners in this process as much as the parents are who get them there. I did not give anyone a thing any moment in my teaching career. I tried to create opportunities, and it was up to students and young people and parents and all of the people that we were working with to do the work to make use of those opportunities. And the good thing, the wonderful thing to go to, conferences and all of these things and see people like Camille and have these conversations, we're all on the same page. But we're all in such different places that over time, it is a question of how do we start to find some similarities regardless of budget and scale, regardless of structure, and so that we're all contributing to the same thing and moving in the same direction, versus all kind of I'm working on my project, I'm working on my project, I'm working on my project. Collective impact is going to be the question for the orchestral field, more than how do we get butts and seats in 20 years. I think I went a lot of directions, sorry.
Rachel, if I could just tag on really quickly to that. I'm so sorry, but Phil, you're spot on. And I loved what you said. And I want to reemphasize about, students coming to you whole. I think that's so important, and it's so missed. The students come with the value add already. And so it's about whether or not you are perceiving that value add. And it goes back to what Kay was talking about. Are you trying to teach them this very one specific thing? Are you actually receptive to the art that they are giving back to you, as well as what you're exchanging? Even within the classical music field, the knowledge of our canon is incomplete. We have wonderful, fabulous Black and brown composers, contemporaries of Mozart himself, that were doing the same work that people were not aware of. So, when you talk about the responsibility also lies in educating oneself and making sure that that incomplete history, that incomplete canon is, okay, well, if I'm missing that, what else am I missing in a part of this other culture, and a part of what is your classical art form in Trinidad and Tobago, and in the Bahamas, where my family's from, and in Spain, and so on and so forth. So we really have to think about how do we start first also with that internal education and that part that we're missing. I didn't learn about Florence Price as a Black woman composer until I was out of grad school. I've been studying music my entire life. So when you look at, and I'm a woman of color, so, just imagine the colleagues in my field, my peers who certainly don't have that experience and aren't seeking that out. So I think it starts there. We have to accept and understand that any culture is full and complete and legitimate and valuable, not just the Western cultural experience, right? And then we have to talk about how are we educating or re-educating ourselves from information that we are missing or that we've been misinformed with. Sorry, I had to say that.
You have no reason to apologize. This has been it's an incredible start to our conversation. I think I'm going to be playing back this section for the rest of my life, every single day, trying to digest everything that you guys shared with us. But Camille, your addition is actually a perfect jumping off point for our next question. which is kind of a two-part question. How does your organization go about determining what it is that students need in your program, what it is that you feel that the communities that you serve in your program need, and how do you go about challenging yourself in the question of programming, whether that's creating, seeking culturally relevant programming, and to whom is it culturally relevant? So who wants to start with that light question?
I can start with a very I'll stay short on this one to try and be kind of clean and precise on it. So there are a lot of, for every organization, there's that question of what are you uniquely suited to do? Actually looking at your organization, taking stock of what you're capable of. And the needs of the community, this is the thing. If we went out and the real answer to how do you know the needs of your community, ask your community. Right? Actually ask those questions, be in the community, be in the space, ask authentically. Don't ask looking for answers to something that you're like, you can craft an answer that looks great on a, budget or a grant proposal, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're connecting to needs. But the other reality, and this is going to be true for orchestras again, based on what your size, scope, the reality for your organization, and those can change over time. But if we reached out and it turned out that the constituents we serve, what they really need is, calculus help, we're going to be not very good at that. I don't know about Fabian, but I haven't done that for 20 years, so I probably shouldn't be a calculus tutor. But we do. So there's I say that kind of ridiculously, but the reality is we also have to be honest with what we have to offer. What's within the scope of expertise that we have, and being open to expanding that scope of expertise. But when we're looking at the questions of what are we uniquely positioned to do, I'll be honest that and any organization that says otherwise, I won't be that dramatic. I question whether I assume that this is true in every organization, but we have a ways to go in really truly acting out the way that we intellectually and ideologically want to approach that question of how do we determine what our program is in collaboration with our stakeholders. For everything down to teachers, to repertoire, to everything, we're engaged in this because we love particular things that we want to share. And there's a certain thing of an orchestra saying, we love this and we want to share this with you. And there's a beauty in that. And that's also, and that's okay, but it's also not just, this is the only way. And so the idea of both bringing into the space, this is what I have to offer. And Camille, what you said is they come in whole, right? And that's true of whether it's young people or whether it's your community. The whole point is that it should be an exchange. This is what we have to offer. This is what we love. This is what we authentically come to kind of share, but it's an exchange. And so what are the things that are really valuable in that community that it may not be musical. It's not always musical. It could be different ways to engage, like in different art forms. So that was longer than I intended. But I think that idea of really being honest as an organization, what are you positioned to do and what really drives you as an organization and the individuals working within that organization, and then authentically having a conversation where it's like, this is what we value. Do you value this? Do you not? Do you want, how do we, and actually engage in those conversations as just human beings? It's easier than we give it credit for. We build it up as a big kind of political thing, but just literally conversations are where the work happens.
I'd love to piggyback on what Phil mentioned, which is incredibly important. Who you go to with regards to learning as where you should go. And that includes our students and our parents and our teachers, and celebrating these ideas. We shouldn't be telling anyone what should be celebrated or what they should be celebrating, and that Mozart is what you should be trying to achieve, right? And this seems like we're all on the same page here. So to go on a somewhat different route, but it's aligned in the same way, I think it's also important to look at the history of your community a bit and see how things have been going on in access to the arts and education. The quality and frequency of arts education in California public schools is highly inconsistent due to competing priorities and limited discretionary funding. As a result, arts participation varies greatly across the state, within districts and schools, and even within classrooms. So as a result, disadvantaged and at-risk youth are often barred from school arts programs in favor of remedial instruction in reading and math. This practice contradicts research evidence that quality arts education provides even greater learning benefits to disadvantaged youth than their advantaged classmates. This is the language that they like to use. In 1970, passage of the Ryan Act eliminated art and music requirements for elementary teacher preparation in the state of California. As a result, the vast majority of today's K through 8 classroom teachers have had little or no systemic preparation to introduce their students to the visual and performing arts. Thus, 80s, 90s, you have independent teaching artists, parent volunteers, and educators from state and local arts organizations partially filling those arts gaps in some schools on a limited basis. And it wasn't until 2000, September 2000, that the visual and performing arts were added to the list of required subjects in the California Education Code. And this is incredible. A lot of people don't know this. Like, it's mandated. You are supposed to go through the system and actually have access to arts education, and yet it's not happening. It's wild. If you look at the state of California, the percentage of arts enrollment is at 40%. And out of the 3,839 schools we have and the 3 million school enrollment we have, there are 68,000 of them that aren't enrolled in arts. In LA County, 41% are enrolled in the arts, yet they're supposed to be having access to it. It's a mandate. So it's pretty wild to, actually look at the numbers, look at the data, and see how things have been going to also help you figure out, okay, what have our students not had access to? What can we bridge? What can we build? Because it hasn't even been there. And, whether it's music, visual arts, theater, dance, they're supposed to have access to all of this, and 0% of our students in schools have access to all four. It's supposed to be all four, 0% of our schools are doing it. So it's really important to check that out as you look at your different schools, different districts, counties, state levels, etc.
I would add and couple the two things that Phil and Fabian said. The two things that jump out to me are relationship, Phil, and a reflection, right? But I feel like it is important so that you analyze, like you said, analyze the area that you're in and grow yourself. So in Baltimore, what does that mean? Kind of knowing, we have program staff in OrchKids that can explain that there are different places. I grew up in Baltimore. Our executive director grew up in Baltimore. There are different people on our team that grew up in Baltimore that can explain to others and teaching artists what the changes were over the past, we have a history of probably 60 years of knowledge of what Baltimore is. So that even before, and I challenge, conservatories, music conservatories like Peabody and different things too, kind of get your students out in the area so that they can understand what's going on, what their students are experiencing, what's different. Why is it that, somebody from the east side and west side of Baltimore can literally live there for 20 years of their life and not meet each other? Because that's just how things were set up. Or why people in, I'm calling specific places, but Roland Park it was advantageous for me to come from East Baltimore to go to school in Roland Park. Why was that such a big deal? And those things kind of play into what you will be able to see as the community as a whole, not even just from the arts perspective, kind of going into the conversations with your students, what they're experiencing, and then pull out from there. It's a lot of observation, pull out from there different things and tools that you have as the orchestra, as the staff member, different knowledge, because all of these things that we have, music itself is knowledge. Our experiences are knowledge. Our connections, our network is knowledge that we can then connect the dots and put people, it's kind of taking some terms that we use in OrchKids, service coordination, right? So if I can't give it to you, I might have gone to school with the people that can. I might know, our partner, Mr. Perry, who is in the background over here, he's a band director at Booker T. Washington, but he also works with OrchKids, but he also went to Morgan State University. So there's a whole cadre of people that then come in and become a part of this larger network that we can then give to the children, because there is so much more information out there than just what we're bringing as our love of the art form. There's connection to different people, different therapists, different, just a whole community of people to be able to build the students and their families and their community, their little towns around them, just different connection by them just being in our program. And so, like you guys are saying, it really is like, for me coming into OrchKids, I have the pleasure to come in and start working with middle school and high school students. And what I was able to do was kind of have conversations with them, but based on those conversations, then also talk to Camille and different people about, for the kids that are coming through the pipeline before they're pre-K through 5, maybe we should start thinking by the time they hit this grade, we have these things ready and set for them to go. Right now, we have the first couple that are in college. So now we're going back and taking knowledge from the ones that are in college and what that pathway, how that worked out with getting them to where they are, and kind of always reflecting and going back and seeing how we can look at the systems that we have tried to design or the things that we've tried to implement and see how that can really be changed and shaped and then kind of molded so that it can be adaptable as time goes along, but it also can be something that's always on our plate to think about as we're shaping the program for our kids in our community going forward. So, for me, really sitting, observing a lot. It took me a little while to observe Booker T and them in action, probably like a year to a year and a half with a different, we had different kids. We had new kids coming in every year and kind of figuring out, even with all of those changes, with all of those kids being different and in play, what was the same? What was something that they were all kind of gravitating towards once we brought this in? Was it the orchestral music? Was it just the playing the instrument? Was it, engagement with a lot of our teachers, teaching artists, or people from the community? Were they amped up about jazz? Were they amped up about hip hop? Were they amped up about where those things intertwine and interconnect? And then figuring out from there how we can pull programming from the orchestra, pull people from the orchestra, pull people from the community, and combine all of that so that their experience becomes a more holistic thing to serve and to then become something that is what that community definitely needed to kind of amp them up. And then they took ownership of it. We figured out that brass band was their thing, and then they took ownership of it, and then it was something that they could then hand down to everybody. Every new person that came was like, hey, you guys can come join this thing that exists, that, we are OrchKids. We're part of the symphony orchestra world, but we get to create music, and their thing was creation. So how can I put in different ways for them to create, to have a say in what they're experiencing in our program?
I'll just add too, I think all of my colleagues are spot on with this. And I just want to put some bones to some of what has been said, and just some logistical feet, rather, I'll say too. But, when Kay spoke about the ensembles, the only way that we really got to that is because we have consistent and frequent student groups. We do not make large, major programmatic decisions until we have consulted, whether they be in elementary, middle, or high school, our student focus groups and our student leaders. And we try to proactively cultivate that kind of discernment in our program, that your voice matters. And Kay mentioned something specifically about composition. That is powerful. OrchKids has been doing that for years. The practice of compositional techniques. Now, I'm not talking about getting your staff paper out and writing your half and whole notes. I'm talking about taking an idea, a theme, and then creating a compositional 7 to 10 minute piece on social justice, on racism, on poverty, on poor transportation. Baltimore is notorious for its horrible transportation system, and is repeatedly, by governors and federal funding, repeatedly ignored and thwarted whenever there is some sort of effort to make some substantive change to that system. And what do our kids need to get to program in school? Everyday transportation. When that is not reliable, they don't go to school. Well, then you want to talk about how poor the school system is and how poorly the students are performing. They can't get to school. So that's one thing. The other thing is hire from your community. So you want your community to be informed. You need to hire from the community. We do that very proactively in OrchKids. And we have talked for years now and are finally manifesting the hiring of our own students back into the program. So we've had teachers now for the past 2 years. We're hopefully more and more as we grow, because this is just like our second year of having like actual college attendees, and first generation college attendees, by the way, coming back to teach with our program as a way to not only give back, but also to sustain themselves while they're pursuing their passions and their ideas. And, you know, the other thing as well, Kay mentioned this too, and I think I've heard it from Fabian and Phil, but this idea of a holistic approach. Like we talk about, there's no way a youth orchestra or a symphony inspired program would be actively putting together, rehearsals and space for a brass band. What? Like that wouldn't be a thing. So, you know, the idea of diversifying genres and how you learn, I'm stake my money on this, all of my money, but our kids and how we train them at OrchKids are so much more far advanced than a lot of their peers in terms of their oral skills, their musicality, their ability to play in different kind of genres. I couldn't even do this at the age of 15 and 14, right? Here I am playing my little quants concerto or whatever it is. And you want me to play by ear and pick up a tune and create a B section and understand the chordal changes and on the spot. Our kids can do that. So I argue, like, who's the more refined musician here? Someone who can just play in one style and do that well, because our kids do that well too, and then can't play anything else and don't have that skill set. So, you know, I think those are some bones to put on some of what's being said today. When you're talking about programming, we need to be focused on creating holistic musicians, not just one kind of musician that is fluent in one discipline. We need to be talking about hiring from the community. How do you create that pathway? It starts when they're in elementary school, by the way. It doesn't start once they get to 9th grade, okay? And also, you know, how do you really think about different groups and involving student voice into the actual programmatic decisions that you're making?
Wow. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Camille. So for those of you, and I see we have a few in our virtual audience who have been to all 4 of our panel discussions, I just want to point out that there are some common themes that we're hearing today that also were present in the previous panel discussion. So in case you missed those themes, one is just holistic. That word keeps coming up, the idea of addressing a student as a holistic person and a community as in a holistic way. And with that, being interested in the teaching of music for the teaching of music, not for the teaching of art music. So understanding that you're learning tools and skills, not that you're just learning an instrument to play a specific kind of composer, and the idea of the active creation of music. So I just wanted to highlight those 3 things because they have come up in every single conversation. So they are important bullet points. And along the idea of bullet points, all of you have already given us so much to think about, and we are so grateful for that. And as we're coming to the last kind of third of our discussion today, a lot of people that come to these discussions kind of like to walk away with some bullet point items that maybe they can take back or think about and bring to those that they work with and the organizations that they work with. So I'm hoping we can briefly, appropriately, but briefly address the question of what tools and resources you and the organizations that you work for would like to see from your community to help you to achieve your goals. So this is an opportunity to share your own kind of wish list of the things that you wish that people would give you or understand, but also to perhaps offer some suggestions for others in terms of what they could be doing or giving back to their communities. So who wants to tackle that first?
I will try to succinctly say, I think for me, like I said at the top of this whole program, is, really looking at the pathway. I would challenge every organization out there, whether you're orchestral musician. So we have orchestral musicians that kind of work alongside the performing arts high school that is in Baltimore as well. If you're in that type of position, or if you're just working with the orchestra or organization and are going into the community, as Phil kind of put it very nicely, don't limit the students to the pathway that you have only experienced. One thing that I'm grateful for is that with me coming through, I've always been kind of adapting in I had to adapt my instrument to every world that I walk into. Again, as a reminder, I play the steel pan, steel drum. So just an cute anecdote, Phil, we need more saxophone stuff. Where's the saxophone kids going? Listen, I said this in one of my other panels, but really, things like in the summertime, like we're looking at pathways for our saxophone students to go through who have been studying orchestral music. They've been going to performing arts schools and they've gotten, music adapted for them and everything. And then when it's their time to go away to a higher level thing, it doesn't exist because they don't exist in the orchestra. Same with me with the steel pan kind of, so the pathway, it can be anything for any student. It's not just straight and narrow into your orchestra. It is a service you are providing, this teaching of music. You're providing something to the students so that they can take that tool and make of their future what they want it to be. And for some of these students, they're coming just to be amongst a community of their peers and be safe and be surrounded by people that care for them at a specific, very crucial time in their life. And so, you want to think about just all of the different things that you as an individual have to offer them, whether it be knowledge of your college experience or different things. Have conversations. Remember that we are people first. Remember that we are people first, everybody on the call. You are connecting with other young people who are trying to find their lives, and you're showing them your love for music and the different ways that you love music. The last thing I think is cultural relevancy. For me, is respecting other people's culture, like quite just simply. But to give you an anecdote, and to just kind of loop it in, we honestly, from how we've been taught, usually start from, the 1300s down. Why can't we start from now, present day, and then tie everything that we know from before back? What I've been doing, Camille and them allowed me the space this summer to do a score analysis class with our kids. And it was a score analysis class that focused on, I went from the lens of showing the music that they have listened to in film now, and then bringing out, hey, this is what the orchestra does in the studio. This is how the composition that you've been tying to, this can lead you to a job here. And so then they can see the orchestra in many different, not just the symphony hall stage, but look at it from a global aspect of this is how I can express myself in a different way. And it's something relevant to what I'm doing right now. So those are some takeaways from me.
I just have two that come to mind, relatively brief, but number one, something that I wish we would receive as either a tool or understanding is understanding all the hurdles that our students go through, and not only our students, our families. Kay mentioned, and Phil and Fabian also, it's not just about how you perceive things and how you were able to manifest your dreams and where you are now. You had a very specific pathway, to use that again, on how you got there. You had very specific resources. You had very specific privileges. Even myself, a woman of color, I had a very specific set of privileges growing up because of my family. My father is not from the US. He's an immigrant. My mother is an opera singer. There is just a different dynamic there where I was able to navigate things differently than some of the students I work with. So I have to understand as well and do a little bit of work too. But when you understand those hurdles, then you can really truly start to be inclusive. So if transportation is an issue, or I can't get to school until 10 o'clock because I have to drop my siblings off to their school because my mom relies on me because she has to work full-time hours, and this is the only way that we can make it work. Am I going to penalize you and fail you for every homeroom because you're not there? Or am I going to try to work with you in that context? You see what I'm saying? And so, I think understanding the hurdles of the community. And the other thing I would have to say too is for funders out there. I spoke at the top of this time together with you all about the social impact of what we're doing. Programs like OrchKids, programs like YOLA, systemic programs around the country. It really is more than just music. We really are embedded into the lives of our students and our communities, and are often, many of us, often going above and beyond what we're supposed to be doing as music educators. And actually, we have a whole series of professional development that we do in trauma-informed practices for our teachers, and cultural awareness training that we do for our teachers. We have various partnerships like with Bon Secours, that's a medical system here in Maryland, and the University of Maryland, Baltimore, to actually work with social work students and interns to come into our program and to deal with families who are experiencing grief and are impacted by traumatic events. Over the time of COVID, during our online lessons, we had one student who experienced 4 deaths of major members in his household in the span of 2 months. But he came to OrchKids and he came to his lessons. So we have that kind of connectivity, and we're able to not only bring that support, but through music. I mean, we all know as artists, as musicians in the field, the impact that the arts have on our ability to learn. There are studies, universities, Hopkins, where we are, just did a whole series on Your Brain on Music. And what kind of implications that has on who you become and your executive functioning skills, shall we say, that corporate America and everybody else is looking for in these positions that are embedded into the work of music. So, the funders who say, well, you're an arts program, so we don't fund the arts. Well, you're not funding the arts, you're funding people's innate ability to change and direct the trajectory of their lives through this pathway that they are building for themselves. And literally, I say to you, I said this a little bit earlier in the time, we now have students, Asia Palmer, Phil, first generation college students who are changing the narrative of their family because of the opportunity through music. She's going to a 4-year, this is one of our beautiful students, going to a 4-year college on full scholarship for all 4 years because of music. Now, that's not to say, and let's be very clear, that this young lady couldn't have got there through other pathways, but let's put the data together, as Fabian talks about, consider her family and who else has gone to college and what opportunities were available to her in West Baltimore and enrichment opportunities and all of that. Could that not have happened in that way? yeah, it could not have happened. But with music, it was secure, and there was a direct pipeline, people funneling to make sure that financial issues were not holding her back. So, I would love to say to the field, especially in these community-based programs, it's so much more than arts. And I believe we deserve so much more access to funding than we currently have right now.
And I'll piggyback there. Yeah, that's also my emoji up there of clapping. And Asia is amazing. But the thing to acknowledge, and when we talk about that idea of that you brought up it was brought up earlier of the network that surrounds them, and the idea of who has that in at heart that can talk to this professor, that all of our other students that are better resourced, et cetera, make choices because I'm going to this school because I've got a better network there. Right? Like that's in the language, but there's a perceived lack of access to that network that we actually, many of us who are in these programs hold the keys to. But then here is one thing that I'll bring up, I'll do it short. One of the biggest issues of the people doing all of this work are part-time workers who do not have access to healthcare, are freelance musicians who in the current moment just lost a significant portion of their income, and they're being asked to step up in ways that are not recognized in hourly compensation. And so the entire economics of this kind of work needs to be turned on its head. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know how it necessarily happens. But one of the things from a governmental standpoint, if we're asking what tools can the community give, universal health care would be one. We'll just say that would be great. The other thing that I will say when Camille brings up the idea of funders, we had a training actually this morning where we were working with teaching artists about these ideas of, in the work that we do, developmental outcomes versus achievement outcomes. And not really versus, but the relationship of developmental outcomes and achievement outcomes. And music, and many of our, everyone in this room has experienced education that has been driven by achievement outcomes, right? It is the concerto competition. It is, did I get into Peabody? Did I get into Eastman? All of these things, right? That we impart on our students by accident sometimes, but also out of a goal, right? Even the idea of going to a 4-year college for Asia could have found other pathways that is a driven young woman who identified that as a goal for herself. And then she was supported by her community in that. And so, but the idea is oftentimes in music, we find ourselves driven by the achievement outcome. And I'm going to draw, and that's in an education space. From an organizational standpoint, I'm going to draw that parallel to content outcomes. This is for the art. This is for the music. This is for the orchestra. But we're not necessarily asking the question of how do we make ourselves mission driven by the developmental outcomes? And I mean that both in the classroom where we're saying it's about music and those achievement outcomes matter because of all of the developmental things that happen as a result of driving towards this amazing achievement. And the achievement of having a great concert, right? If we're going to have this huge concert that's going to be well attended as an orchestra, there are ways to do that you make your money, the concert is well attended, and it was a great performance musically. But if your goal of that is to have an amazing performance where we make X much, profit over what we spend on the concert, you're going to end up with a particular product. If your goal is to have a community event where everyone is engaged in that experience in one way or another, then the shape and scope, even though it's driven by all of the things that have to go into having an amazing performance, it's an amazing experience for concert goers, for young people, it means you create these experiences that have a different feel because your goal is different as an organization. You're actually driven by these outcomes that are again, holistic, right? It comes back again. And so just being kind of thoughtful about what is the mission and what are you trying to accomplish? And then asking those questions of yourself of Are we truly accomplishing this? How do we know that we've accomplished it? And what are the things that make this go beyond? And be honest when it's just like this. I just want to have a great concert. That's what this is about, right? Sometimes that's what it's about, and that's beautiful. But just be honest when it's that, and then that is going to, in the long term, train funders when we can start to actually speak more knowledgeably, and when we can go to the research that Fabian's pointing to. And actually, I'm going to put something in the chat because I keep on reading it over and over again for like the last decade. The President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, former president, put out this Reinvesting in Arts Education. So much amazing advocacy, information, and all these things that are driven. All of the info is out there to be able to have funders buy into the research, whether it's brain studies, whether it's, talking about the orchestra as like, economically struggling. The arts and the creative sector in the United States is billions of dollars of our economy. And we're a significant part of that. And we're the ones who limit ourselves when we see ourselves as part of this thing over here. And so thinking about how we engage, anyway, I think I'm going to just say all those pieces of really thinking about what is the mission behind the work, and then using data to actually get funders on board for things that aren't about achievement outcomes. We are training funders to care about achievement outcomes. We need to now train that field to look for different things, because we're going to be so armed with the information and the expertise and the work that we do in community engagement that we are the ones that can change what funders are interested in.
Fantastic. Thank you. Oh, Fabian, were you going to add something?
Well, I didn't know if I should add or pause and take a step back.
I think we have one question that's come in so far,
Okay.
but absolutely, this is kind of our last question for the panel, in a holistic way. So if you would like to go ahead and answer, go ahead.
Well, one thing that I think is really important that we've already talked about, but it's building trust with our communities and empowering them to a point where they can ask us challenging questions, and we embrace it, and we really think about what are we doing culturally. I had a I'll call this person a civilian since they're not in the arts, right? They asked, well, how is YOLA or the LAFL, how are they culturally responsive? And I was a bit taken aback by that question, right? Because even though we're obviously, we've been talking for the past hour and a half almost about how we can be responsive. I think one of the takeaways some of our guests here can take that's applicable is maybe, how can you apply that to your repertoire? How is your repertoire culturally responsive? If you have a concert series, how are you thinking about diversifying what's on that concert series? If the content that we're sending out to our community is homogeneous, can homogeneity lead to oppression? How do we combat that? Let's start asking people to be more aware of what they were sharing with students. What is the content as it relates from a cultural competency perspective? And is everything in your content based on 17th, 18th, and 19th century European music? If that is all of your content, then we can't be an inclusive space if you've literally excluded every other country, So let's try to think about what it looks like if we can include some more of the rest of the world. If you have a leadership position, I'm not saying that every flute teacher has to teach this piece and every violin teacher has to teach that piece, because that's essentially recreating the oppression that already exists in the system. But because our system says you got to play this piece to get into that orchestra, and only if you play those pieces can I recognize your quality of playing, right? According to that logic, the only way I can recognize how you play and your worth is if you play the Tchaikovsky violin concerto. But if you were to play a concerto by Lawrence Price, I can't tell if you're any good, which makes no sense whatsoever, but that's the system. So, I think it's important for us to consider, do we want to recreate that system and just put people of color into it? To me, that's not what the end goal is. I think the end goal is to remove that system and to liberate everybody, even those who think that Western European art music is the only type of music that we should be teaching at our community music schools or, OrchKids or YOLA or what have you. It really begins with us just trying to understand what are some of the things that are being excluded. It begins by asking the question, and often, who's being excluded? What genre or culture is being excluded? And when you look at, people in our organization or others, shouldn't the cultures of the people who are here be reflected in the culture that we're sharing? Let's think about that, and you can easily apply that into your repertoire.
Thank you very much, Fabian. Well worth the additional conversation having you answer that. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Verena. I believe we've had one question come in. I'm not sure how much additional time we'll have for any additional questions, but also use the chat function. That's a great way to be able to engage with each other as well and to ask questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Verena so she can cue that person. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so we have so far just one question that wants to be asked here directly to the panel. Brian, if you would like to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Hey, Phil. And hello, my Baltimore colleagues. I'm here asking in my question from Baltimore. I do a lot of work with OrchKids as well. But it was awesome to hear this panel and just the amazing different goals that came, that you talked about came out of your program. Noticed, actually didn't sound like there was so much emphasis on access to, as much focus on access to classical music education or as opposed to a lot of other things like exposing music to students to lots of different music. I heard engaging students in different social issues or thinking about them as citizens, maybe even thinking about their path to college or lifelong learners in music. And I'm just wondering, those are all such different goals. And I'm wondering, how are you as programs really deciding on how you prioritize those goals? And when you're making decisions about what you do, how do you navigate the issues that come up with doing that?
I'll just say quickly, we're in the orchestra space and we're in the education space, right? We're teachers, we're practitioners, we're musicians. We're not all as naturally, oriented towards being data driven as we always can be. And so just to speak for YOLA, I can't speak for OrchKids, can't speak for any other organization. We're getting better at actually starting to be more intentional about the outcomes we want and then tracking those outcomes in a way to say, have we achieved them? I know that's not like I don't know if that answers it in full, but the idea of us actually is that if we asked, part of the reason why we had a training this morning, which was in and around these outcomes, what are our outcomes, is to get to the point where across the 50 to 60 teaching artists in YOLA, we have an assumption that if we asked everybody, what's the reason we should be having YOLA? Why does YOLA exist? I'm going to get 50 to 60 answers, right? Their motivation for being in the classroom, their mission as a teacher is so varied. And some people care about the art. Some people are like, yeah, the art is great, but I'm here for the kid. I don't teach music. I teach children music. And not, it's just, they all create a whole. And unless we can, again, getting to that idea of mission alignment, how do we work together to all decide, have common language around what are we trying to accomplish through this program, and then say, how do we know we accomplished it? And actually design some measures to do that. We've done an amazing job in some respects. And then in other respects, we're like, every other educator where you try and get past that idea of yeah, but I know that we've done it because I was there and I can feel like we've done it, right? We need to move past that or else we can't complain about the funding structure either, right? So the answer, so Brian, in the end, we all need to, that prioritization should come in conversations again at the board level, at the staff level, at the teachers, like at the parents and students and all of those. And again, I got to get out of the language of level. Those stakeholders need to be engaged in conversation where we come to consensus around why are we doing this? How do we define success? And then actively creating some clear ways to agree, yes, we succeeded, or B, more than likely, we succeeded in these ways. We feel like we can improve in these ways.
I think I'll tap in on the OrchKids side, and I guess the orchestra, Baltimore Symphony Orchestra side. So I feel like there are people on the call that might know the story that, Marion, like Camille put in the chat before, started this program with 30 kids in West Baltimore, out of a school that eventually closed down. This is the history of the show. And now the show is, when Marin talks about OrchKids out in the global atmosphere, she says she wants 10,000 kids in Baltimore. So that's one big priority that just globally people are listening to. But one of the things that I think OrchKids has done really well is building, like Phil said, these different spaces for reflection. I brought up reflection, but reflection, observation, and cultivating kind of like where we are. So we have, leadership meetings at the beginning of every year, kind of beginning and middle of every year to kind of figure out where we're going for the year based on what we've done in the past year, what things came up, what things need to change. We also have implemented, Camille brought up student panels and parent panels and different things. And so the prioritization becomes for those students based on observations that we've made and different things. One thing that Camille and our executive director, Raquel, have tried to implement over the past few years has been pilot programming. So different things that we want to try, actually, trying to design it in a small way and then making a scope. So just for example, this brass band was a pilot idea that I wanted to try at my site. And then from there, because it worked at that site and students saw it working, they became interested, even though OrchKids had been doing creative composition in their programming for years, because it was a once a year thing, I wanted to move it to a yearly, once a week thing. And that became a pilot, which then translated into the students became more interested and wanted to do it. So then we could make those kind of think about in ensemble terms, how to pilot ensembles of that size through the program. Our cross-site ensemble was a pilot. So there are different ways that if we feel like the community, the stakeholders, and Phil and Fabian hit the nail on the head. If the community is asking for it, and there's a way for us to figure out to make it happen, and it's something that we can see in the long term will affect in a positive way what's going to happen with the program for the future, we try to find a way to pilot it, implement it with a small amount or a certain site, and then move it forward. So when I came in, we didn't have that many middle schoolers, and now we have college students. So it's like, along the way, we have to pilot certain things, mentorship, different things to make it happen. Mentorship, not just side by side mentorship, but these kids are having academic issues. How can I pull on different resources here and pilot something with this small batch and then blow it up? So that's what we've been doing to try to prioritize all the different goals that we have kind of thrown at us from funders and parents and students themselves. Like you said, we have to balance all of it. And it's just been reflection, a constant state of reflection to do that.
I'll also just quickly add, Kay, that's absolutely spot on. But Brian, I think what you speak to as well is getting clarity in language, the language that everyone is using. And Phil kind of spoke to this too as well. So we've done, and we continue to do redrafts. I mean, we haven't posted it publicly yet, but drafts and redrafts of our mission statement. Because what we were finding is this question was lurking. Are we an artistic program? Are we just a music education program? Or are we a social change program? And so what does that look like? Or how do we take these two and create an umbrella that embraces the concept of another? And so that's, I mean, if you can see my figure right here, that's what we're doing now. We embrace that we are a social change program, and we also have elements and pockets of that high artistic quality and pathway for students who want to go and pursue that option. We also provide excellent education to the rest of our students as well, but it's a breadth of what they have access to, Brian, that we continue to provide because we consider ourselves a social change program. So that starts to put clarity on our priorities. And as long as we all sit at the table, which we've done, and we've been in process probably for the past 3 years, each year, kind of going through this exercise of what is the specific language we're using. And so that's been key in trying to sort out these priorities. And I think we're doing a decent job of that right now.
One last thing I would like to say is, like, you know, we're in a space, I think, within OrchKids that we've been running for so long, that we're also embracing, and I think YOLA is as well, embracing our foothold on innovation now. So it's moved from, like, we've been doing this and everything is good and we've been existing as a regular music education program, into kind of innovating because our students are pushing, because they're bringing up problems that we've never seen before or we didn't experience because we went through our different various pathways through higher education and came back into these programs at different levels. We're now having to kind of innovate and think outside the box to serve the people that are coming to us, these whole students that are coming to us. It's like, okay, so Asia wants to play all music and her teacher thinks that she's great at classical music, but she wants to have jazz lessons. I can set up a mentorship for her outside. I have a student right now who is in 12th grade who wants to become an instrument repair person. So my brain is like, I need to, you know what, look around Baltimore. You know what I noticed? There's no apprenticeship program for that. We need to create something in our program that can serve our program. What if students in our program want to do that? There are, we can do it within the program. We can affect what's happening in Baltimore City by that. So we're just kind of like looking at what's coming up and, not taking everything on like a big project, but really thinking through our students, how can we innovate and be on culturally relevant? Because culture is not just about my skin color. Culture is about the people I'm in community with all the time. I am in community with these people all the time. How can I affect them? Baltimore is part of my culture. Being Black is part of my culture. Being a musician is a part of it. We exist, it's intersectionality, right? We exist in so many at once. And so bringing all of that in, and then figuring out, look at my network and say, how many people do I have around that can kind of support that? And I think that also drives where we tackle, where we get to go first, because some things are easier to address first, and some things take a longer. We have to figure out which are long-term goals and which are shorter-term goals. And so, yeah, that's what we are in innovation mode right now.
I'm going to just do a final, very short tag on that when we talk about innovation, because none of us have talked about the fact that for however long we've been on Zoom, and all of this innovation has been put upon us, whether we like it or not, in all phases of what it means to be a musician, what it means to be an orchestra, what it means to be a youth orchestra, all of these things, right? So the one thing that is also happening for all of us right now is the idea that we were already needing to innovate. Right? We were already like, we cannot sit and just say this program is what it is. But we also all need to recognize the very unique opportunity we have right now of a year from, like, all bets are off. A year from now, we can either spend the next year reacting and then be in the same place we are right now in a year, or we can start planning ahead and we can start actually being starting to define what we want the future to be for ourselves and for our program. And when everybody else is like, this is the time, right? If I'm the people on Wall Street are like, everyone's in upheaval, now's the time to make some money. From the arts perspective, it's like everything, like no definitions matter right now about what does success look like. So let's define success for ourselves artistically, creatively, and innovate. I mean, that's kind of where I know all of the programs are. But it also is like, you know, I've been in my house for the last 7 months. So I also have to like, how do I keep myself, I have my own self-care to still be able to work from a place like that. So anyway, that's a whole other session, but just felt it was important to at least mention the space we're in when we talk about innovation.
Wow, thanks to all of you so much. I feel like this session could go on for another year, and it would be incredibly engrossing. And it's just been wonderful to have you, Phil, Fabian, Khandeya, Camille, all of you. We can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your expertise with everyone, and just how positive you are, and how visionary you all are. It's really beautiful. I just want to commend, on a personal note, all of your organizations for not taking away these programs at a time of financial constraint, but to leaning into those programs. And the organizations are showing that they're putting their money where their mouth is, and that if children and education are important, we're not going to cut those programs when push comes to shove. So thank you to all of you, sincerely. We're so grateful to have you with us. And thank you to our virtual audience that has tuned in for today's conversation. And now's the time where I tell you about what's coming up next. And, you know, we've been doing this program for the music education series since the end of August, and we're coming up to our last music education series, which is actually going to be a workshop style conversation on Saturday, October 24th, tentatively from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So the same time that this one was, just a few weeks down the road. And the idea is that if you're interested in attending that, it'll be a panel discussion, and then actually using Zoom's great breakout function to be able to talk to the panelists one-on-one and to create some opportunity for feedback and discussion. So hopefully if you're in our virtual audience and you're interested in that you will sign up for that and look for that on our website and Facebook. In the meantime, I want to extend again a huge thank you to our panelists today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. And we hope that all of you have a wonderful day. And please feel free to say goodbye as you're leaving. Don't feel like you have to just click off and go away.
Big thanks to you, Rachel, and Verena as well for putting this all together. It's a great time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Buddy,
Yes. Echo that. Thank you, Rachel, for having us and making this possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye, guys. Stay safe on the West Coast.